The helicopter's rotor wash hit me like a fist as Eric brought us down through the gray North Sea morning. 15 years I'd been chasing things that shouldn't exist, through places that shouldn't be empty, and I could tell from the way the pilot's knuckles had gone white on the stick that this one was different. 2 hours! Eric shouted over the engine noise as the skids kissed the platform's helipad. His Scottish accent turned the words harsh, clipped. 2 bloody hours, Norton, then I'm gone whether you're back or not. I'd worked with Eric maybe 6 times before this. Reliable guy. Flew cargo runs to offshore rigs, search and rescue when the weather turned ugly. Never seen him rattled. But his face had that waxy look people get when they've glimpsed something their brain won't file away properly. The rotors kept spinning. That told me everything. What did you see on approach? I had to lean close to his ear, the engine noise cutting through everything else. Eric's eyes flicked toward the platform's main structure, then snapped back to his instruments. Nothing. Saw nothing. The way he said it made clear he was lying. Just get your business done quick, eh? I grabbed my kit bag from behind the seat. Standard loadout. Salt, iron filings, blessed silver. Things that worked when conventional wisdom fell apart. The bag felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just the weight of knowing I had a clock running. Keep her warm, I told him, stepping toward the helipad. Wasn't planning on shutting down. My boots hit the metal grating and the helicopter lifted immediately, pulling back to hover maybe 50 yards out. Close enough to extract me fast if needed. Far enough that Eric could run if things went sideways. The condensation coating the platform caught my attention first. Should have been normal salt water from the morning fog, but when I knelt and touched a finger to it, the smell hit wrong. Copper, yeah. But underneath that was something organic, something that belonged in a butcher shop, not on an industrial platform floating in the middle of nowhere. I wiped my finger on my pants and stood up slow. The platform stretched out in front of me like a steel island. Drilling tower rose maybe 200 feet into the gray sky, derrick and drawworks silent. Should have been noise, generators, pumps, crew moving around. Instead, I got silence so thick it felt like cotton in my ears. 15 years of this work had taught me to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming that something fundamental had gone wrong here. Not just broken equipment or an accident, something deeper. The air tasted metallic when I breathed through my mouth. That copper organic stench seemed to coat my tongue, stick to the back of my throat. I'd smelled variations of it before, in a farmhouse outside Tulsa where a family had disappeared, in the basement of a textile mill in Maine where workers had stopped showing up one day. Never this concentrated, though. Never this fresh. The platform's superstructure loomed ahead, all angles and industrial bulk. Living quarters stacked like shipping containers, mess hall and recreation areas, the control room where someone should have been monitoring operations. Windows reflected the gray sky back at me, giving no hint of what might be waiting inside. I started walking toward the main structure, boots ringing on the metal decking. The sound echoed wrong, too sharp, like the air itself was thin somehow. My watch read 9:47 in the morning. 2 hours meant Eric would lift off at 11:47 whether I was aboard or not. The thing about supernatural entities, and I'd learned this the hard way over 3 continents, was that they left signatures, electromagnetic disturbances, temperature fluctuations, sounds that didn't belong. But mostly they left feelings, impressions that crawled up your spine and made the hair on your arms stand up. This platform had all of that and more. The metal beneath my feet felt wrong, not just cold, that I'd expected this far north in October, but somehow hollow. Like the whole structure was resonating with something I couldn't hear. When I put my hand on the railing leading up to the main deck, the vibration traveled up my arm. I'd started hunting these things after my grandmother died. Not because she'd been killed by one, but because she'd spent her last 3 months telling me stories about things that lived in the spaces between what people could see. Thought it was dementia at first. Then I started paying attention. Jade Norton had been a practical woman her whole life. Raised 6 kids during the Depression, worked in a munitions factory during the war, buried 2 husbands and never complained about either. When someone like that starts talking about shadows with teeth and sounds that eat memory, you listen. The control room sat at the platform's center, windows facing all directions. That's where I'd find the logs, the crew schedule, some indication of what had happened here. The personnel manifest I'd seen back on shore listed 37 workers, 37 people who should have been going about their daily routine, monitoring drill operations, maintaining equipment, eating meals in the mess hall. Instead, I got silence and that smell that made my teeth ache. The walkway to the main structure was maybe 30 yards. I covered it in careful steps, listening for anything that might tell me I wasn't alone. The only sound was my boots on the grating and the distant whoop-whoop of Eric's helicopter holding position. When I reached the entrance to the living quarters, I stopped and checked my watch again. 9:51. 1 hour and 56 minutes remaining. The door stood half open, swaying slightly in the wind. Should have been secured. Safety protocols on platforms like this were strict, but it hung there like an invitation, or maybe a warning. I pulled out my flashlight and tested the beam. Strong and steady. The batteries were fresh, but I'd learned not to trust electronics around entities that fed on energy. Had backup chemical lights in my kit just in case. The copper organic smell was stronger near the door. Not overwhelming yet, but present enough that I had to breathe shallow to keep from gagging. Whatever had happened here, it had happened recently. Days, maybe. Not weeks. I stepped through the doorway into the platform's main corridor, and the wrongness hit me like a physical weight. The air felt thick, resistant, like walking through water. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim red, throwing shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The control room lay straight ahead, maybe 50 feet down the corridor. That's where I'd start. Get the basic information first. Crew logs, radio transcripts, anything that might explain why 37 people had vanished from a platform that should have been impossible to leave. My grandmother used to sing me to sleep when I stayed at her house as a kid. Old songs, lullabies her mother had taught her. Simple melodies that stuck in your head for days. I found myself humming one now as I moved down the corridor, though I couldn't remember starting. 9:53. 1 hour and 54 minutes. The clock was running, and something in the platform's depths was waiting for me to find it. The control room door hung open like a mouth. Hydraulic hinges had given up their fight sometime during the night, leaving the reinforced steel panel canted at an angle that let the corridor's emergency lighting spill across banks of monitors and instrument panels. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not decay exactly, but something wrong. Sweet and metallic, like copper pennies left in sugar water. 15 years of chasing things that shouldn't exist had taught me to trust my nose before my eyes, and my nose was telling me to turn around and walk back to the helicopter. My eyes found Tim Alexander in his supervisor's chair. What was left of him anyway. The uniform sat perfectly arranged, navy blue company shirt with the Pelagic Industries logo stitched over the breast pocket, khaki work pants with the regulation crease still sharp down each leg. Name badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. T. Alexander, platform supervisor, etched in block letters. Safety vest draped over the chair's high back like he'd just shrugged out of it for a coffee break. But Tim wasn't inside the clothes anymore. The fabric had collapsed inward, conforming to the chair's contours like a deflated balloon. Sleeves hung limp from the armrests. Pant legs had crumpled against the seat cushion. The collar of his shirt gaped open, revealing nothing but shadow and empty space where a man's neck should have been. I moved closer, had to. The skin was still there, stretched across the chair like a discarded snake's shed, translucent and papery. I could make out the texture of Tim's weathered hands where they draped over the armrests, fingers still curved as if he'd been gripping something. The broad outline of his shoulders, even the mole on his right cheek, now just a dark spot on tissue-thin membrane. Whatever had done this had hollowed him out completely. Bones, organs, blood, everything gone except the outer shell, left behind like a cast-off costume. I'd seen a lot of impossible things, creatures that existed in the spaces between spaces, entities that fed on fear and memory and the electrical impulses that made thoughts possible. But this was different. This was surgical precision applied to something that should have been chaos. Industrial accidents didn't work this way. Men got crushed by machinery, burned by steam, broken by falls from height. They didn't get emptied out and arranged in their chairs like mannequins waiting for the next shift to start. Corporate sabotage was messier. Explosions left debris. Poisoned air left bodies. Even the most sophisticated biological weapons would have left traces. Tissue damage, chemical burns, something a forensics team could catalog and analyze. This wasn't human work. I stepped back from Tim's chair and turned toward the wall of security monitors. 24 screens and a 6x4 grid, each one cycling through different areas of the platform. Most showed exactly what I'd expected. Empty corridors lit by emergency strips, vacant common areas with chairs pushed under tables, deserted workstations with computers still humming through their overnight processes. The galley, empty. The communications center, empty. The main deck, empty. Storage bays, empty. 19 men had been working this platform when contact was lost. 19 names on the crew manifest I'd reviewed during the helicopter flight. Now I had one body that wasn't really a body anymore, and 18 others somewhere in this maze of steel and concrete. I leaned closer to the monitor bank, scanning each screen for movement. Static flickered across camera 12, probably a loose connection somewhere in the junction box. Camera 15 showed a door swaying slightly on its hinges, moved by air currents from the ventilation system. Camera 7 caught my attention. Crew quarters. 3 rows of bunks in a long, narrow room, each one separated by thin metal partitions that gave the illusion of privacy. Personal items scattered on the small shelves. Photographs, paperback books, coffee mugs with company logos. Exactly what you'd expect from men who spent 3 weeks at a time on an isolated platform in the middle of the North Sea. But something was moving between the bunks. I reached for the zoom controls, adjusted the camera's focus until the image sharpened. The figure moved with deliberate purpose, pausing at each sleeping area like it was conducting an inspection. Too tall for the space. Had to duck its head to avoid the overhead pipes that ran along the ceiling. 7 feet, maybe more. Hard to judge scale through the monitor, but it dwarfed the standard issue furniture around it. The joints were wrong. Arms that bent in places where human arms shouldn't have joints. Legs that folded backward at angles that would have snapped bone and torn muscle. It moved like a praying mantis, all sharp angles and careful precision. At the 3rd bunk from the left, it stopped. Leaned down over the mattress where someone should have been sleeping. The camera angle made it impossible to see what it was doing. But I watched its shoulders move in a rhythm that suggested it was searching for something specific, methodical, patient, like it had all the time in the world to examine whatever it had found, or whatever it was looking for. My blood went cold watching it work. Not the quick chill of fear, but the slow, deep cold that came from understanding that you were looking at something that operated by rules you didn't know and couldn't predict. Something that had turned 19 men into a single, empty uniform and was now conducting some kind of inventory in their sleeping quarters. The creature straightened, moved to the next bunk. Same careful examination, same patient attention to detail. Whatever it was hunting for, it hadn't found it yet. I watched through the grainy black and white footage as it continued its search and felt the familiar weight of a clock that had started ticking the moment I'd stepped onto this platform. 19 men. 1 hour and 54 minutes since I'd arrived. And something hunting through their beds with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. When I'd taken this contract 3 days back, I figured I'd be dealing with the usual mess. Industrial accident, maybe. Equipment failure that turned 19 men into statistics. Hell, I'd even considered corporate sabotage. Some competitor wanting to shut down North Sea operations with a little creative terrorism. Never figured I'd be staring at something that shouldn't exist, watching it hunt through a platform like it owned the place. My duffel bag sat on the control room floor where I'd dropped it, zipper half open from when I'd pulled out the basics. Standard gear for standard problems. The Remington 12 gauge lay across my lap now. Familiar weight that usually brought comfort. Problem was, I'd loaded it with double-aught buck before leaving Aberdeen. Good for stopping men. Useless against whatever that thing on camera 7 was turning out to be. The rounds in the chamber felt wrong suddenly. Dead weight. I'd seen enough in 15 years to know when conventional thinking needed to get thrown out the window. And that moment had arrived about 5 minutes ago, when the creature had started its deliberate hunt through the sleeping quarters. Standard buckshot. Christ. I popped the shotgun's action, ejecting the shells one by one. They hit the metal floor with sharp little clinks that echoed in the control room's electronic hum. 5 rounds. 5 chances I couldn't afford to waste on ammunition that would bounce off whatever I was dealing with. The duffel bag's side pocket held my insurance policy. Every hunter learns to carry backup for scenarios that don't fit the manual, and I'd packed accordingly. The silver-jacketed rounds had been intended for a completely different job. Some werewolf problem up in the Scottish Highlands that got canceled when the client turned out to be having psychological episodes instead of supernatural encounters. Lucky me. The shells felt heavier than standard loads when I pulled them from their foam padding. Custom work from a gunsmith in Montana who understood that some problems required unconventional solutions. Silver-jacketed hollow points backed by enough powder to punch through engine blocks. They'd cost me $300 for a box of 20, but I'd learned that cutting corners on ammunition was a good way to become someone else's cautionary tale. My hands stayed steady, loading them. Muscle memory from too many nights like this, when normal rules stopped applying and survival came down to preparation meeting opportunity. Thumb the shell into the chamber, work the action, repeat. The familiar ritual helped keep my mind focused while every nerve in my body screamed at me to drop everything and run. Because that thing on camera 7 had started moving again. The monitor showed corridor B deck, where the crew quarters lined both sides of the passageway like a hotel hallway. Emergency lighting cast everything in that sick red glow that made shadows dance in ways that played tricks on your eyes. But there weren't any tricks here, just something that moved with purpose through the narrow space, checking each door it passed. It had been moving for the last 10 minutes, and I'd been watching every second, learning its patterns, trying to understand what I was dealing with. Then it stopped, just froze in place like someone had hit a pause button. The elongated head that didn't belong on any anatomy chart I'd ever seen went perfectly still in the corridor's center. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing moved except the static lines running through the old camera feed. That's when its head started turning. Slow rotation, deliberate as a gun turret tracking a target. The thing's neck shouldn't have been able to move that way. Too far, too fluid. Like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen how human joints actually worked. But it kept turning until that eyeless face pointed directly at the camera lens, looking right at me through 50 yards of steel and wire. My throat went dry. The loaded shotgun felt like a toy in my hands. Then the thing's face split open. Horizontal line appeared across what should have been a mouth, widening into a grin that belonged in nightmares. The edges peeled back to reveal teeth that curved inward like fish hooks, designed for gripping rather than cutting. Row after row of them, each one gleaming wet in the emergency lighting. It knew I was watching. The realization hit like cold water in the gut. This wasn't some mindless predator hunting by instinct. It understood the camera system, knew someone had to be monitoring from the control room, and instead of avoiding observation, it had deliberately positioned itself to be seen. The smile widened further, stretching the thing's face into dimensions that made my eyes water, trying to track the geometry. Those inward curving teeth clicked together in what might have been anticipation. This was an invitation. A challenge. The creature had found the platform's crew and done whatever it had done to them. Now it was calling out the only person left who might pose a threat, letting me know exactly where it was and what it was capable of, daring me to come down and face it on its own terms. I could have stayed in the control room, barricaded the door, radioed for backup, waited for a military extraction team to handle the problem. That would have been the smart play, the safe play. But 19 men were dead or worse, and something wearing their faces was hunting through their beds with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. The loaded shotgun felt solid in my hands now. Silver-jacketed rounds that cost $15 each, backed by 15 years of experience dealing with things that shouldn't exist. I had a job to finish. The creature on camera 7 tilted its head slightly, that impossible grin never wavering, still waiting, still watching, still inviting me to come and play. I stood up from the control room chair, shotgun cradled across my chest. The platform's corridors stretched out beyond the reinforced door, emergency lighting painting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Somewhere in that maze of steel and machinery, something that had once been human was waiting for me to accept its challenge. No choice in the matter, really. The hunt was on. The emergency lighting cast everything in that sickly red glow as I made my way deeper into the platform's guts. Each step down felt like descending into something's throat, the metal grating beneath my boots vibrating with each footfall, the sound echoing off steel walls that seemed to press closer together the further I went. I'd memorized the manifest on the chopper ride over. 7 crew members on the night shift when everything went to hell. 7 names, 7 faces from company ID photos. 7 people who might still be breathing somewhere in this floating tomb. The drilling floor had been their domain, 2 levels below the main deck, where the real work happened. Where men turned machinery that bit through rock and seabed, chasing black gold through miles of ocean floor. My Remington felt solid in my hands, silver rounds chambered and ready. 15 years of this work had taught me to trust the weight of loaded steel more than any prayer or lucky charm. The weapon's familiar heft kept my breathing steady as I navigated corridors that twisted like intestines through the platform's belly. The emergency lights flickered in sequence ahead of me, creating a strobe effect that made every shadow dance, made everything look like it was moving when it should have been still. I'd learned to hate that particular trick. The way crisis lighting could turn an empty hallway into a carnival funhouse where threats lurked behind every corner. But the crew quarters were down here somewhere. Had to be. Platform layouts followed maritime regulations, and I'd studied enough offshore rigs to know the pattern. Living spaces below the workdeck, mess hall adjacent to the galley, sleeping berths arranged in neat rows like a floating barracks. If anyone had found sanctuary when the creature started hunting, it would be in those reinforced spaces designed to weather North Sea storms. The corridor split ahead, and I paused at the junction. To my left, a sign pointed toward crew mess in faded yellow letters. To my right, sleeping quarters in the same industrial font. The air here carried different scents. Stale coffee, industrial soap, the lingering smell of men who worked hard and slept harder. Normal human odors that felt almost foreign after breathing the sterile emptiness of the upper levels. I chose left, mess hall first. If survivors had gathered anywhere, it would be in the communal space where they ate their meals and played cards during off hours, where they'd naturally gravitate during a crisis, seeking comfort in numbers and familiar surroundings. The door stood partially open, spilling yellow light into the corridor. Not emergency lighting, actual fluorescence, humming with electrical current that meant someone had kept the power running down here. My pulse quickened. Survivors meant answers. Meant witnesses who could tell me what I was hunting. I approached the doorway with my weapon raised, barrel tracking ahead of my eyes as I'd done 10,000 times before. The sound of my breathing seemed impossibly loud in the confined space, each exhale echoing off metal walls that had absorbed years of human conversation, laughter, arguments over card games, and work assignments. When I reached the threshold, I stopped, listened. No voices from inside, but something else. A soft, rhythmic sound, like fabric rustling in a breeze that shouldn't exist. Like the whisper of clothing against skin as people shifted in their seats. I stepped into the doorway and saw them. All 7 crew members sat at the long metal table that dominated the mess hall. Their hands were folded before them with perfect uniformity, fingers interlaced like they were waiting for grace before a meal. They wore their work clothes, coveralls and safety vests, hard hats placed neatly beside their elbows in a row that looked almost ceremonial. Their eyes found me the moment I entered. 7 pairs tracking my movement with mechanical precision, heads turning in unison like they were connected by invisible wires. But their faces, Christ, their faces. Where their mouths should have been smooth tissue had grown across their lips. Not scars from wounds that had healed badly, but new flesh that looked like it had never known separation. Like their mouths had been sealed from birth, lips fused into seamless lines that gave their faces the appearance of unfinished sculptures. I recognized them from the manifest photos. Abigail Webb sat closest to me, her safety officer coveralls still bearing the reflective striping that had marked her as someone responsible for keeping others alive. Jose Thompson was there too, his sandy hair matted with sweat beneath his hard hat. Those green eyes I'd seen in his company photo now wide with something that might have been terror or relief. George Solomon occupied the chair at the table's far end, his maintenance coveralls stained with the honest grime of a man who fixed things for a living. The others, names I'd memorized but faces that blurred together now, sat between them in perfect formation, a receiving line of the damned. They watched me with the intensity of children caught misbehaving, waiting to see if punishment would follow discovery. But they couldn't speak, couldn't explain what had happened to them, couldn't beg for help or warn me about whatever had done this. They could only sit and stare and hope I understood the message written in their transformed flesh. Then Abigail began to weep. The tears started as pinpricks in the corners of her eyes, gathering moisture until they spilled over her lower lids and carved clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. Silent sobs that shook her shoulders without sound. Grief expressed through body language alone since her voice had been stolen along with her mouth. The others remained motionless beside her. Jose's eyes never left my face, but his hands stayed folded, his posture rigid as a statue. George stared at some point past my shoulder, his weathered features carved from stone. The remaining 4 crew members sat with identical stillness, like mannequins arranged for display. But Abigail wept, for herself, for her crewmates, for the impossibility of what they'd become. The tears fell steadily now, dropping from her jaw to stain the yellow fabric of her safety vest. Her chest hitched with suppressed sobs, and I could see her throat working, as if trying to force sounds through tissue that would no longer part. Looking at those 7 faces in the emergency lighting, the truth hit me like cold water. This thing hadn't just killed randomly and left survivors by chance. No. Every choice had been deliberate, every victim selected with purpose. The crew members sitting there weren't survivors at all. They were trophies. Abigail Webb stared at me from her chair, her mouth moving in those silent, desperate attempts at speech. Jose Thompson's eyes tracked my movements while his throat worked uselessly. George Solomon's chest hitched with suppressed sobs, all of them aware, all of them trapped inside bodies that would no longer obey. The thing had kept them alive to watch, to bear witness to whatever came next. My hand tightened on the Glock's grip. 15 years of hunting monsters, and I'd never encountered anything this methodical. Most entities killed out of hunger or rage or simple alien instinct. This one had turned human beings into an audience for its performance. And I was the main act. The realization settled in my gut like a stone. Every step I'd taken since landing on the platform had been choreographed. The bodies positioned to lead me deeper. The video feed showing me exactly where to find these silenced witnesses. Even Tim Alexander's perfectly preserved corpse in the control room. All of it designed to draw me here. To this moment. This room. These watching eyes. I'd walked straight into a trap, and the worst part was knowing I'd had no choice. The job was the job. Someone had to come. Someone always had to come. And that someone was always me. The emergency lighting flickered once, twice, then died completely. Absolute darkness swallowed the room like a mouth closing, the kind of black that pressed against your eyeballs and made you question if you still had them. I'd been in deep caves before, underwater caverns where no light had ever touched, but this felt different, heavier, like the darkness itself had weight. My breathing sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. 7 other people breathed with me, their rhythm visible only moments before in the rise and fall of their chests. Now they were just sounds in the black, hitched gasps and suppressed whimpers from throats that couldn't form words. Then I heard something else. Movement in the corridor behind me, not the quick scurry of rats or the metallic ping of cooling pipes. This was deliberate, measured, the wet slide of something massive dragging itself across steel grating. My finger found the Glock's trigger guard. Fat lot of good it would do me if I couldn't see what I was shooting at. The sound came closer, rhythmic now like breathing, but wrong. Too wet, too deep. Each exhalation carried a musical quality, almost like... No, my blood turned to ice water. The thing was humming, not just any tune. A melody I'd heard 10,000 times as a kid, sung in a voice that had meant safety and warmth and everything good in a world that kept trying to grind me down. 3 notes up, 2 down, the gentle rise and fall that had carried me off to sleep for the first 8 years of my life. Hush now, baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. Grandma Jade's lullaby, the one she'd sung when the nightmares came, when Dad was drinking again, when the house felt too small and too angry for a kid to handle. Her thin fingers combing through my hair while that soft voice wrapped around me like a blanket. The creature in the corridor was humming it, note for note. My mind recoiled from the sound like touching a live wire. This wasn't possible. Grandma had been dead for 23 years, and that lullaby had died with her. I'd never sung it to anyone, never hummed it. Hell, I'd barely thought about it since her funeral. But the thing knew it, every rise and fall, every gentle pause between verses. It had reached into my head and pulled out something sacred, something that belonged to the one person who'd ever loved me without conditions. And now it was using that love against me. The humming grew louder as the creature approached. I could hear the wet slide of its movement between each musical phrase like it was conducting its own approach with that stolen melody. The sound echoed off the metal walls, bouncing back from all directions until I couldn't tell where it was coming from anymore. My hands shook. The Glock felt heavy and useless in my grip. This wasn't just about killing me. Any monster could do that. This thing wanted to break me first, to take everything that had ever mattered and twist it into something poisonous, to make me hear my grandmother's voice in the throat of whatever nightmare was sliding toward me through the dark. The humming stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat hammering against my ribs. 7 other people breathing in short, terrified gasps. The distant sound of waves against the platform's legs. Then the breathing started, slow and deep and wet, like air passing through damaged lungs. Each inhalation seemed to draw the darkness closer, making the black around me feel solid and crushing. The thing was close now, close enough that I should be able to reach out and touch it. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely think past the violation of hearing Grandma's lullaby in that creature's throat. I stood there in the pitch blackness, surrounded by 7 people who'd been transformed into silent witnesses, listening to my own childhood being twisted into something monstrous. The breathing continued, patient and rhythmic, like the thing was savoring this moment. Like it was waiting for me to understand that everything I'd ever loved could be turned into a weapon against me. And in the darkness, with that wet breathing filling my ears, and Grandma's stolen lullaby still echoing in my head, I finally understood what I was really dealing with. This thing didn't just kill, it desecrated. I pulled the trigger and kept pulling it. The silver rounds tore through the darkness like angry hornets, each muzzle flash strobing white against the emergency red. I couldn't see what I was shooting at, just aimed for where that wet breathing had been coming from, and let muscle memory do the rest. 7 shots. 8. The Beretta bucked in my hands with each round, brass casings pinging off the metal deck somewhere behind me. Then something screamed. Not human, not animal. Something else entirely, like sheet metal being torn apart while someone strangled a steam engine. The sound hit my eardrums like ice picks, so sharp and piercing that my vision went white around the edges. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the gun as my ears felt like they were bleeding from the inside. But I'd hit it. Whatever the hell this thing was, I'd put silver into it. The emergency lights flickered, once, twice, then snapped back to full power with that familiar electric hum, flooding the corridor in steady red illumination. Empty hallway stretched out in front of me. No 7-foot nightmare. No pale flesh or wrong-jointed limbs. Just metal walls and deck grating and the lingering smell of gunpowder mixing with something else. Something rotten and sweet, like flowers left too long in standing water. But there, leading away from where I'd been shooting, a trail of black ichor splattered across the deck. Thick drops of it, each one about the size of a silver dollar, leading toward the far end of the corridor. The stuff didn't look like blood, too dark, too viscous, more like motor oil mixed with tar. I followed it. Each step felt deliberate now, measured. The emergency lighting cast everything in that red wash, but at least I could see where I was going. The creature's trail led past empty crew quarters, past the mess hall where I'd found those 7 faces, past equipment lockers and maintenance panels, always heading in the same direction. Toward the drilling floor. Made sense, in a sick way. That's where this whole mess had started, according to the logs. They'd been drilling through something they shouldn't have touched, and this thing had crawled up through the hole like some nightmare from the ocean floor. The black drops got bigger as I followed them, more frequent. Whatever I'd hit, it was bleeding worse now. Good. Maybe the silver was doing more than just making it scream. The corridor opened up ahead of me, and I could see the heavy steel door marked Drilling Operations, Authorized Personnel Only. The trail led straight to it, then through the doorway beyond. I could hear machinery humming on the other side, pumps and generators still running on automatic, keeping the platform's basic systems alive even though everyone who operated them was dead. I stepped through the doorway and into Hell's workshop. The drilling floor stretched out like an aircraft hangar, all exposed steel beams and industrial equipment. Massive drill pipes rose up through the center of the space, disappearing into the platform's superstructure above. The actual drill hole sat in the middle of it all, a perfectly round opening in the deck about 10 feet across, surrounded by safety railings and warning signs. The black trail led straight to the platform's outer edge. I followed it past control panels and equipment racks, past warning signs in 3 languages, past emergency stations with their bright yellow phones. The strobing emergency lights up here cast everything in intermittent shadow, red illumination washing over the space, then fading to black, then blazing back to life again. Made it hard to track the trail, but I kept my eyes down and followed the drops. They led to the railing at the platform's edge. That's where I finally saw it completely. The thing had dragged itself to the safety rail and collapsed there, leaning against the metal barrier like a drunk trying to stay upright. 7 feet of pale, stretched flesh that looked like it had been molded from wet clay by someone who'd never seen a human body before. Its limbs bent in places where there shouldn't have been joints, arms that folded backward at the elbow, legs that twisted at impossible angles. The torso was too long, too narrow, like someone had grabbed a normal chest cavity and pulled it through a taffy machine. But the face, Christ, the face. It shifted while I watched, flowing from one expression to another like water finding new channels. One moment it wore Abigail Webb's features, her dark hair and round cheeks, and that small scar above her left eyebrow. Then the flesh would ripple and change, becoming Jose Thompson's square jaw and thick mustache, then George Solomon's narrow features and prominent nose. All the faces it had consumed, cycling through them like a broken slideshow. It turned toward me as I approached, and the features settled into something I recognized. Tim Alexander's broad face and pale blue eyes, that permanent frown etched deep into weathered skin, even had his small mole on the right cheek, perfectly reproduced in stolen flesh. When it spoke, the voice came from somewhere deep in its chest, metal grinding against metal, like gears that needed oil. "You think this is over," it said through Tim's stolen mouth. The words came out wrong, like the thing wasn't used to forming human speech. "You think one platform matters." I kept the Beretta trained on its center mass. The silver rounds had torn holes in its torso, black ichor still seeping from the wounds. But it was still talking, still moving, still alive. "Others are coming," it continued, Tim's face twisting into an expression the real supervisor had never worn, something between hunger and anticipation. "Swimming up from the deep places, following the holes your kind drilled through the ocean floor." The emergency lights strobed again, casting the creature's face in alternating shadow and red illumination. In the flickering light, I could see its flesh continuing to shift and flow, other faces trying to surface through Tim's borrowed features. This platform was just the beginning. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because of what it said, but because of how it said it. Not a boast, not a threat. A statement of fact, delivered with the casual certainty of someone reading tomorrow's weather forecast. I heard those words as both threat and prophecy, and realized that everything I'd fought through down in the platform's depths, the empty uniforms, the 7 faces in the mess hall, the creature stalking me through the corridors, had been nothing more than a preview. This thing wasn't the invasion, it was the scout. I emptied every remaining round into that thing's chest. The silver bullets punched through whatever passed for flesh on the creature, each impact sending dark fluid spattering across the deck plating behind it. My finger worked the trigger like it had a mind of its own. 15 years of muscle memory taking over while my brain tried to process what I was seeing. The thing that had been wearing my grandmother's voice like a stolen coat jerked with each hit, but that impossible smile never wavered. Not once. The muzzle flashes strobed white against the emergency lighting, turning everything into a nightmare slideshow. Flash, the creature's torso erupting in wet craters. Flash, dark blood painting the steel behind it. Flash, those 2 wide eyes still locked on mine, still grinning like this was all some cosmic joke I wasn't smart enough to understand. The slide locked back on an empty chamber. Click, click, click. I kept pulling the trigger anyway, some part of me refusing to accept that I was out of ammunition. The creature swayed on its feet, holes punched clean through its chest, showing glimpses of the churning ocean beyond the railing. Whatever held it together shouldn't have been enough to keep it upright, but it was still standing, still smiling. "Should have brought more bullets, Stevie." The voice came out in Grandma's tone, but with something else underneath it now, something vast and patient and infinitely amused. The creature took a step backward, then another, until its spine pressed against the safety railing. Dark fluid ran down its legs to pool on the deck grating. "Don't worry, though." Another step back. The railing groaned under its weight. "You'll understand soon enough." I dropped the empty pistol and lunged forward, but the creature was already going over. It toppled backward with deliberate grace, arms spread wide like it was embracing the fall. That smile followed me all the way down, painted across features that were definitely human, but assembled all wrong, like someone had built a person from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. The dark water swallowed it with barely a splash. I grabbed the railing with both hands and leaned out, scanning the churning waves below. The platform's lights cut through the North Sea gloom for maybe 20 feet before everything dissolved into black nothing. No sign of the creature, no thrashing or struggling or even ripples to mark where it had gone under. Just dark water and the steady thrum of the platform's machinery. The wind picked up, carrying the salt spray across my face and mixing with something else. Something that smelled like old graves and deeper things. I wiped my eyes and looked again, but the ocean had already erased any trace that the creature had ever existed. Except I could still hear Grandma's lullaby echoing in my head. "Rock-a-bye, Stevie on the treetop." I pushed away from the railing and ran. The platform felt different under my boots now. Not just damaged or abandoned, but actively hostile. Like the steel itself was working against me. Every step echoed wrong in the corridors. Every shadow seemed to shift just outside my peripheral vision. The emergency lighting flickered in patterns that looked almost like Morse code, spelling out messages I couldn't quite read. My lungs burned as I took the stairs 3 at a time, heading for the upper levels. The helipad was on deck 7, and if Eric had any sense left in his thick Scottish skull, he'd still be waiting for me. Had to be. The extraction window was tight, but not impossible. Not yet. I'd been counting the minutes in my head since the creature fell. 3 since I'd emptied the clip. Maybe 4. Add the time it had taken to get from the mess hall to the deck where I'd cornered the thing, and we were looking at maybe 10 minutes total since Eric had dropped me off. He'd wait. He was getting paid too much not to wait. But even as I told myself that, I could feel the truth settling into my bones like winter cold. Eric Olson was a pilot, not a soldier. He'd seen enough in his 54 years to know when a job had gone sideways, and everything about this platform screamed wrongness loud enough to wake the dead. The man had survival instincts. Always had. I just hoped his greed was stronger. The stairwell to deck 7 stretched ahead of me like a throat waiting to swallow. Each step up felt like walking deeper into something's mouth, but I kept climbing. What choice did I have? Swimming wasn't an option. Not in these waters. Not with the nearest land 60 miles away and the North Sea temperature hovering somewhere around hypothermia. The helipad door stood open ahead of me, salt wind whipping through the gap to rattle the steel frame against its hinges. I could hear the ocean beyond it, waves slapping against the platform's support pillars with a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. I reached the door and stopped. The helipad was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The landing circle stretched out under the gray morning sky like an accusation, yellow paint bright against weathered concrete. The safety barriers stood unmanned, orange windsocks hanging limp in the still air between gusts. No helicopter, no Eric, no salvation. Just me and 40,000 square feet of North Sea platform that was slowly dying around me. I walked to the center of the landing pad anyway, boots echoing hollow against the concrete. Maybe I'd miscounted the time. Maybe Eric was running late or circling back from a safe distance, waiting for my signal that the threat was neutralized. Maybe I was kidding myself. The horizon stretched empty in every direction. Gray water meeting gray sky in a line so straight it looked drawn with a ruler. No helicopter, no boat. No sign that the outside world even remembered this place existed. Then I saw them. Navigation lights, red and white and blinking steady, maybe 2 miles out and getting smaller. The helicopter's profile was just visible against the overcast sky. A black speck trailing a thin line of exhaust as it headed northeast toward the Scottish coast. Eric was running. Had been running. Probably since the moment he'd set me down on this platform and gotten his first real look at what he'd delivered me to. Smart man. Smarter than me, apparently. I stood there watching those lights fade into the distance until they were just another part of the gray nothing that surrounded me. The wind picked up again, carrying sounds that might have been waves or might have been something else entirely. Something breathing deep in the platform's belly. The creature's final words echoed in my memory, spoken in Grandma's stolen voice with that infinite patience underneath. You'll understand soon enough. Not a threat. A promise. I'd killed the thing that had been stalking these corridors, wearing the faces and voices of the dead like party masks. Put enough silver into its chest to drop a grizzly bear. Watched it fall into the dark water with that impossible smile still painted across its features. But it hadn't been afraid. Not even at the end, because it wasn't the real threat. Never had been. I thought about the 7 faces in the mess hall, sitting around that table with their throats carved open and their voices stolen. About Tim Alexander's empty uniform in the control room, positioned like someone was still wearing it. About the way the creature had moved through the platform's corridors like it owned the place. Like it was just making itself at home while it waited for something else to arrive. A scout. That's what it had been. An advance team of 1, sent ahead to clear the way and prepare the ground. The real invasion was still coming. I walked to the edge of the helipad and looked down at the churning water below. The platform's support pillars disappeared into the black depths like the legs of some enormous spider. And somewhere down there in the darkness, I could feel something stirring. Something vast and patient and hungry. The creature I'd killed had been a preview, a taste of what was coming. The real horror was rising from the deep places where the light never reached, and I was stranded here to meet it alone. 60 miles from land with no radio, no boat, and a platform that was already dying around me. The North Sea stretched empty in every direction, and somewhere in those black depths, something was climbing toward the surface. I was about to find out what 15 years of hunting monsters had really been preparing me for.